What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap and with Lily, and today we're going to talk about 20 different decks from the Golden Gauntlet. I'm going to talk about a bunch of different decks that players used to qualify for the World Championship Golden Gauntlet tournament, which means they went 5-1 or better in this event, and big story up top, I also went 5-1 in this event. I was already qualified for Worlds from top 16ing the previous Golden Gauntlet qualifier, but it's pretty sweet that I was able to do it again. This time I did it with a 34 card big deck, Arishem, Thanos, and Agamotto, all the cards in there, plus a few new additions with Stardust and Cosmic Ghost Rider. I talked about these changes and why I wanted to play this deck a little bit already in some YouTube shorts, so I'm not going to get too into it here, especially because tomorrow's video will be my entire tournament run. All of my games throughout the event, plus even a bonus game from the Snap Judgments League that I played in between the rounds. This deck was pretty good for me. You'll see it in action tomorrow. I do think I'll just say this. We had a pretty open metagame. There were certainly some defined best decks, and we'll get to those in just a moment, but overall, with the start of a season, with the OTA that just happened, with a bunch of new cards added to Series 4 and Series 5, I felt like the metagame was fairly wide open, and that's a time where I really like to play Arishem, because it just has fairly consistent large power battles for priority. That was something that I thought was also important to me, while also being very good in the open deck list format, because your opponent doesn't really know exactly what you're going to be doing, and it's just flat, reasonable power level with tech answers for a bunch of things that your opponents could be playing. And I like having access to cards like Shang-Chi and Stardust and Legion, because it just makes every time I snap really, really scary to stay in the game, because your opponents are never going to know if you have it or if you don't with such a large deck, and either way, I think you get a lot of value out of just good, consistent gameplay with Arishem. Now, you will notice I cut Goliath, and I'm not sure if that is the best way to include both Stardust and Cosmic Ghost Rider. I personally am still a fan of the Agamotto and Thanos packages, and they do work well together because the Agamotto's Images of Icon spell gives you something really, really powerful to do with some of those Thanos stones, and I employed that strategy numerous times throughout the event. The stones also allow you to have a cheaper Mockingbird while also increasing the overall curve of your deck. And that might sound confusing. Putting a bunch of one-cost cards in your deck increases the overall curve, but it does. Agamotto and Thanos are both big cards that you can slam on turn 4 and turn 5, and the stones give you ways to spend that extra energy so that you don't have energy left over at the end of turns, and you can just curve out a little bit more efficiently. I also like a lot of the things that the Thanos stones give you access to. Space Stone allows you to play into unknown locations, and Reality Stone just gives you a little bit more disruption. I think that those are both good tools that I want, and then also Soul Stone can have some good uses in there as well. So all of those made me gravitate towards this build of the deck, and because I already had the big cards with Agamotto and Thanos, I thought that Goliath made the most sense to cut. I do still really like Galactus, especially with Images of Icon in various ways. So yeah, this is what I wound up playing. I think it did pretty well for me, 5-1, and like I said, you can watch the full tournament run in tomorrow's video. I'm doing a giveaway for PAX bundles. Stick around till the end of the video to find out how you can win. Moving on, we have the number 1 deck from this tournament from the Electric Flame playing Apocalypse Discard, and I think it's fair to say at this point, this is not a fluke. This is a real deck. We saw it do fairly well at the previous Golden Gauntlet qualifier, and this time 5 players played Apocalypse discard decks to qualify for Worlds, going 5-1 or better. And I think that this deck is very easy to underestimate. I underestimate this deck because it's a fairly classic archetype. There aren't even that many new cards in it, Khonshu being the newest addition to the deck, which can give you another really good top-end option, able to just put out 24 power just by himself on the final turn if you've gotten him to the full moon form. But the rest of the deck has like a bunch of Series 1 and Series... I mean, I don't even know if any of these cards are Series 2 or Series 3. Maybe Gambit is, but a lot of these cards are very low-level classic collection cards that have been basically the same since the start of the game. I know there's like a little bit of differences with Lady Sif, right? Or with Blade, rather. Lady Sif, I think, has been the same the whole time. Colleen Wing, I think, has been the same since the game released. Don't quote me on those things, but you can quote me that this is an actual good Marvel Snap deck that, like I said, people underestimate. I think that it's very easy to kind of write off a Dracula or think that you're going to be able to contest a Dracula's power at a location, and you really just can't. Dracula basically just wins the location, though there are some mind games with it where your opponent like ignores the location where you play the Dracula, and then you actually just play your Apocalypse or your Khonshu at a different I mean, the Apocalypse makes more sense. You play the Apocalypse at a different location, and then you just discard like a Corvus Glaive or maybe even a Proxima Midnight to your Dracula and wind up putting more power elsewhere because your opponent is not trying to battle up against the Dracula. So those mind games are always an interesting aspect of it, but this deck, I think, has definitely proven itself. At this point, this is a real contender, and I don't really have too much more to say about it. I need to play this deck more myself. Khonshu, I identified from the previous Golden Gauntlet as a underrated card, and even with that, I never played this deck. I played the Bullseye Khonshu decks and tried that out, and that was fun, but I'm definitely going to be trying out this deck on my channel soon for sure. I think that it might also be a good budget deck because there's not many Series 5 cards in it. You might not have Khonshu and Proxima Midnight potentially, but because there aren't that many Series 5 cards in the deck, it might be worth spending some of your in-game resources in order to craft these 2 cards because the rest of the deck is so accessible. So definitely look out for that in the future. And next, I want to take a look at our second place deck, which is already incredibly spicy, other than the Alfredo name would imply potentially. Canadian Alfredo has brought a Morgan Le Fay deck and got second place in this event with it. And I think that is largely because of Killmonger, which we're gonna see in a second is a really good card against a lot of the decks going forward, particularly the Victoria hand decks, which was the most played archetype that was able to qualify for Worlds. And this is not a deck that was really on my radar at all. I have not seen anyone doing anything like this, so huge props to Canadian Alfredo. And honestly, it just feels cool. I know that's like such a basic word to say, but I really just have my personal faith restored in Marvel Snap when time after time in these high-level events, we see unique decks take the titles. We had Bounce, we had Arishem in the second one, and then we had Spectrum ongoing, and now we have Khonshu Apocalypse with Morgan Le Fay in second place. I don't think that you can really ask for better results as a fan of Marvel Snap. Yes, people are still doing well with the expected best decks, but there's also people playing stuff like this and just totally crushing it. So let's dive into this deck a little bit, because it has some cards that people are probably not super familiar with, even with Morgan Le Fay. What does Morgan do? I'm going to pull that up on the screen just so y'all can see it. If you're not used to this card, it has an on reveal where you return all of your discarded and destroyed cards to your hand and give them +3 power. +3, a pretty big boost. And that is really what this whole deck is built around. Airwalker, when destroyed, grabs a 4-cost card from your deck or hand, and Morgan Le Fay is the only 4-cost card in this deck, so you will always be grabbing Morgan Le Fay, and then you will even always be returning a 3/6 Airwalker to your hand along with any potential 1-cost cards you destroyed. And then you might be able to destroy the Morgan again alongside having a Fire Hair in play and just do some really ridiculous things while also easily tossing priority because you're destroying your own cards and battling with Killmonger to destroy your opponent's demons and whatever things they're creating, and then also throwing down a cheap death on the final turn. So this deck has ways to go really high over the top, but then also just play a solid game of Marvel Snap, because this is kind of a bounce deck in disguise. We see Silver Sable, Rocket Raccoon, America Chavez, and Korg. Korg being the only clog card here is a pretty clear indicator that we're looking at a bounce deck right now. And also Nico Minoru, of course, that's going to get played in a lot of different decks. Nico Minoru is just very good, very versatile. But then we're just playing a bunch of cards that you would typically see in bounce. I am curious if there is a better card to play than Korg specifically. I guess they don't want Hawkeye. They decided they didn't need Elektra with access to Killmonger. So what else would it be? Yeah, I guess all of this is fine. Could have seen the Hood in this deck though too. And I think that might be better than Korg, especially with Nico and all of the other ways to clean that up. Yeah, I think I like the Hood. It might not be the most synergistic with Morgan Le Fay. I mean, you're playing Korg and then it's going to come back as a 1/5, whereas the Hood would only come back as a 1/0. Not as exciting, right? But I do think it is super exciting to see such a spicy list from Alfredo here, and yeah, really, really cool stuff. Moving on to the 3rd place deck list, we have Madame Eva's Move, and I think this is a fairly straightforward take on what move should look like right now. We saw Sizer have a similar move deck in the previous tournament, but now we are adding in Sparky, and I'm personally looking to try this. I have not played with Sparky yet at all, so I still need to farm up some boosters on him, so I will be playing at least one game with this deck so that I can get my 5 Sparky boosters, and I think it looks good. I also just unlocked Hellion the other day, made a YouTube short about that, so I'm not super familiar with this sort of big move archetype, but it is cool that it just got another tool in the form of Sparky. Noticeably absent, no Zorn, no... oh goodness, what is the 3-cost Topaz? No Zorn, no Topaz, just Cloak, Hellion, and Heimdall, as well as some of these cheaper cards to move things around. But these are all kind of known quantities from move bounce, and what I think separates this deck more is the Cloak and Hellion, in addition to Alioth and Cosmo, which are a great combo that we've seen time and time again, because they allow you to both be proactive and protect your own cards, but also reactive and stop some of the most powerful things that would go over the top of you. Specifically Hela, it's not going to stop the ongoing decks, though actually, I'm sorry, Alioth can stop the ongoing decks, especially if you know they're going to play to their Iron Man location on the final turn or something like that. Alioth can certainly be big, and really the flexibility of the archetype, being able to battle for priority when you want that, when you need that. This is a deck that I think mostly battles for priority, with Heimdall, Cosmo, and Alioth all sort of favoring that as opposed to the traditional move bounce. And yeah, then Eliath and Cosmo on the final turn just give you a lot of options to create a lot of points. So really sweet move deck. And I think that this is basically like, I can't imagine a different move list. I mean, some people are still trying move bounce, but I really can't imagine a different configuration of move cards that isn't these 12 really. I mean, maybe Iron Fist could make it in just for being cheap. There's no Vulture in this deck. It's aiming to completely dodge Heimdall, so we could even see a Vulture in it. The payoffs are pretty low in this deck, just Craven, Dagger, and Human Torch, but seems sweet to me. Moving on to the 4th place deck. I didn't write down which player actually got 4th place with Victoria Hand, but there were a bunch of players playing Victoria Hand overall. There were, based off a breakdown by Fox, I did not do this breakdown myself, but he said that there were 6 players playing Moon Girl Victoria Hand, 2 players playing Destroy Victoria Hand, which we will look at in just a moment, 2 others playing Werewolf Victoria Hand, and then 2 players playing Wiccan with Victoria Hand. I think that those numbers are low. I think that there were more players playing this archetype that weren't counted, or potentially there were just people, I mean, most people playing, what I saw was a bunch of this list exactly, but the main flex slots in this list became Surge and Shadow King, and some people chose to go with like Werewolf Merlin in those slots. And then I also saw some Wiccan, I saw some Tech in those slots, potentially like Mobius, Negasonic Teenage Warhead. There definitely is some flexibility, but I think Shadow King and Surge are the 2 main cards that you cut. I think that this was also the most known quantity going into this event, so it's no surprise that a bunch of players played it and did well with it, but I think that the exact list is still kind of being refined. There's some people still playing Juggernaut, some people playing Surge, both of those cards recently nerfed. I do think we might wind up seeing a nerf to Victoria. She could easily become a 2/2, and that's not going to change much, and would potentially make her more easy to like Red Guardian or something. We could also see a change to Misery. It's a bunch of players have talked about this. It's nuts that this card is a 4/9 with like incredible upside. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, seems ridiculous. So I think that some of this does certainly need to get reined in, but until that, it is still a very, very powerful deck option. Next, we are going to jump down to the 10th place deck because a lot of the players were playing Victoria Hand in the top 8 and otherwise, but I wanted to highlight a Cerebro 5 deck from Duality. So the Cerebro breakdown, 6 players qualified playing Cerebro, 3 with Cerebro 2, 2 with Cerebro 3, and Duality remained as the on-top solo Cerebro 5 player. They were the only one to top 16 with Cerebro, and playing with, Cerebro 5 was definitely not expected to me. Merlin is their way to control locations here, in addition to Luke Cage. Merlin, if you change one location with Omniversal Presence, Merlin has 5 power. So that's what you're looking to do with Merlin. And then you just have a bunch of cards that can make multiple 5 power guys with Scarlet Spider and Dr. Doom. Serra can get cheated out with Wave, so that way you have multiple turns of cheaper cards. And then you have the Ancient One to go way over the top, making everything in that location have Cerebro's ongoing text. Or, in a pinch, you can use the Ancient One on Miss Marvel instead. Juggernaut, now also a 5 power card. Maybe that alone is just reason to play Cerebro 5. I'm not sure. I have not really played with this archetype since the Ancient One was released, but this is another one that I personally really want to try. When I was playing this before, I was playing with maybe Titania, I can't remember, but definitely with Martyr, but now just Rhino, and then hoping to play Rhino and Cerebro in a location, and then Ancient One both of those. So that way you kind of get some nice value there out of the rock. You can use that for the Ancient One, or you can use Rhino to just easily activate a Miss Marvel location while having a bunch of Miss Marvel effects in the center location thanks to the Ancient One. So all of that seems really cool, really fun, and yeah, there's just like overall a bunch of decks that I want to try from this event. So you'll certainly be seeing some content from these in the future. I've got these a little bit out of order, but we're going to jump over to the 12th place deck list, which I almost was not going to talk about. That's why my decks are a little bit out of order here, because this is, I mean, basically the deck list that I played in the previous tournament. The only change here is the addition of Mr. Fantastic instead of Eliath, with the deck now having Fenris Wolf as a 3-cost card that ups the curve slightly. So we're bringing the curve down again with Mr. Fantastic for first steps. And that is, certainly a change worth talking about, but I didn't want to spend too much time on this archetype other than just to say Wiccan is not dead. Fenris Wiccan is not dead, even with the move of Fenris Wolf up to a 3-cost card. There were still 5 players that qualified with Quicksilver Wiccan and 5 players that qualified with Quicksilver Domino Wiccan, another deck that we've seen rise up a little bit, but still 5 players playing probably pretty close to this archetype. I don't know if they were all running Fenris Wolf, but at least this one was, and it top 16'd, so that shows you this deck still has some legs. Moving on to the 13th place list, we have Urantian's Kid Omega Phoenix Force deck, and this is a deck that I have not yet showcased on the channel, but I have played a little bit with it. I have like a YouTube short queued up. I just haven't edited it and, recorded stuff for it, but this is a pretty cool deck. It's a weird deck for sure, but it can actually do stuff, and I haven't played with this exact list, specifically with the Prodigy and Absorbing Man, that could allow you to do some really interesting things. I don't even know how Absorbing Man works with Phoenix Force, to be totally honest, but the main combos with this deck are Cassandra Nova and Sage, which you are then trying to destroy, get additional value out of them with Fire Hair, and then even more value with Phoenix Force, Absorbing Man, and Elixir to bring them back in some crazy capacities. And that can lead to some pretty powerful combos. It's definitely a weird deck. Oh, and then also Nico Minoru functioning on multiple levels here. It can destroy your cards to set up for a Phoenix Force or Elixir or Fire Hair, of course, but also if you get Nico on the double my power mode, then there's some cool things that you can do when you destroy that. Triggers your Fire Hair, doubles up Fire Hair, and then if you bring back a Nico, it gets to double itself immediately. If your Phoenix Force hits a Nico that was previously on the double mode, so it will be a 1/4 Nico that you destroyed, it will come back as a 1/4, attached to the Phoenix Force, 9 power, doubles up to 18. That's a pretty cool combo that like a lot of people don't really even expect, and I think if you have it on the copy a card mode, you will just get a copy of the Phoenix Force thing. I don't exactly know on that, but I know that Nico is pretty busted when you're reanimating it and re-triggering his spells. This deck also plays Enchantress, which is potentially partially a concession to Living Tribunal Spectrum ongoing varieties of decks, but it also may be in here to stop Stardust, which would otherwise prevent Elixir and Phoenix Force from doing their things, and that might just be like a necessary card that the deck has to play right now. Like I said, I have not played this exact configuration, but I've played very similar decks to it. And then I've also messed around a little bit with White Tiger after that got buffed. And this deck is, I think, here's what I'll say about it. So there's one player Jeet, who really likes Phoenix Force and plays Phoenix Force a bunch, and they stream, and they have the Untapped tracker on, and they do really well playing a variety of different Phoenix Force decks. And what that means is the Phoenix Force data on untapped.gg is like mostly just Jeet data, which means this deck looks very good. And the deck might be a little bit worse than that when worse players also try it, but because they don't, because it's just Jeet, the deck looks really good. But that means that, like, it's there, right? Like, it is possible for players to figure out all of the wacky configurations that are going on with this deck, because this deck does have like really wacky things that it's doing, especially with Prodigy and Absorbing Man added in. I haven't even unpacked all of that stuff, but if you take the time to master a archetype like this, it can pay dividends because it is really strong. There's just not many people doing stuff with it, but that can also be a good thing because people won't be expecting it. And yeah, we see some good success there, getting into the top 16 with that. And we also have, actually, on the topic of like a one-trick player, Hela Enjoyer, despite their name, is actually a Living Tribunal one-trick, basically. And I almost played this deck in the previous Golden Gauntlet. I consulted Hela Enjoyer and ultimately decided to play Hela instead of this deck, but they love Living Tribunal, and now they are trying out a Quicksilver Domino Wiccan Living Tribunal that uses that extra energy to go way over the top. They've got the Ancient one in here, but mostly this deck is trying to go Iron Man Onslaught Living Tribunal after potentially either a Magic or a Jubilee or an Esme Cuckoo or how else could they do it? They could Esme into Serra or just Esme into Onslaught or Living Tribunal to get all of these pieces onto the board in one location and then try to win it. I do cover some of my thoughts on, because I think I played against, not this deck, but I did play against a Living Tribunal deck in the Golden Gauntlet. So if you want to watch my full tournament coverage, I did play against Living Tribunal twice, actually. So you can see some of my thoughts on how to play against it. I think that it does lose some points in open decklist mode when your opponents know you're playing Living Tribunal at the onset of the match, but I think that it actually makes it even more impressive that Hela Enjoyer was able to top 16 with a Living Tribunal list. Moving on to the 15th place list, we have Father Newman playing Moira X, and this is also a Victoria Hand deck. I said there were two Destroy Victoria Hand decks, but Moira X was not a card that I expected to see much play in the Golden Gauntlet qualifier, especially in this configuration, and especially to top 16, the Golden Gauntlet World Championship qualifier. So this is super sweet, and basically just using Moira X, there's actually, so when Moira came out, it wasn't asymmetrical information. You got to see which cards your opponent would create off of a destroyed Moira. That has since been fixed. Only you get to see which cards Moira is going to create, and there is a little graphic to indicate that, and your opponent will not get to see that graphic anymore. If Moira has the chance to create more copies of Victoria Hand, it's just crazy. If Moira has the chance to create an additional copy of Moira, it's just crazy. So there are a lot of ways that Moira can go super over the top of the other Victoria Hand decks, and that is obviously really sweet. I want to share a bonus deck right now, and this is just a deck that I've been sort of working on in the background. There's going to be two bonus decks in this video. Otherwise, all of the decks are decks that qualified for the World Championship. But on the topic of Moira and Morgan Le Fay, which we have already discussed in this video, here's a little something that I've been cooking up. I don't think it's quite there yet. but there's some pieces. So there's two things that this deck is doing that I think is cool. Honestly, there's a few things that this deck is doing that I think is cool, but the main combo that I wanted to draw attention to, and Bobo John from the Snap Wars League brought this idea to my attention, trying to play Kid Omega into Airwalker for a turn 3 Wiccan. Is that worth it? Is that good enough? I don't know, but it seems super sweet, so we are trying that here. And with Moira, it actually gives the deck a ton of additional gas to go over the top, because you need something to do with your Wiccan energy, and Moira and Morgan Le Fay give you some synergistic, with the Destroy package, ways to create a bunch of cards to make use of with Wiccan. So, like I said, I don't know if this is totally all there yet. This is just a little bit of a bonus deck that I wanted to bring up on the topic of Moira and Morgan doing well recently. I also briefly had Moon Girl in a deck that looked like this, as just a third card that Airwalker could grab. And there is also, there's like fire, is it called Firewalker? I don't know, but there's like a 4/6 that brings back a 3-cost card or something like that. Haven't tried that one out yet. I did not unlock that card, but that is another option that you can play with. And now we are going to move into decks that didn't make the top 16, but did qualify for Worlds, that I wanted to highlight because I thought they were sweet. And first up, from Defined, we have a fairly straightforward Annihilus deck. It is also running Black Panther Arnim Zola combo, and it is also playing Galactus. And having these 3 distinct ways to attack your opponent really can make things tough, because even in an open deck list format, even when they know that these things are potentially coming, they can't always play around all of them. And we saw Butt have a pretty similar idea not too long ago. I've played with some archetypes that look like this, but really just like, and I keep saying Butt now, I just think it's cool to highlight someone that is playing some cards that nobody else is playing. And that's mostly what we're going to look at as we take a look at the decks that didn't make top 16, is some decks that like one person played but still was able to go 5-1 with, and there weren't a bunch of buys in this event. So the 5-1 players actually went 5-1 in this event, and I think makes that even more impressive, obviously, because yeah, they actually had a pretty good result. And I don't think that there's that much. It's just like a little bit of luck, a random coin flip here or there separates these players from potentially making top 16 and potentially from there being able to win the event. So want to show some respect here to Define's Galactus deck, Galactus Annihilus, and don't have too much more to say about that other than I suppose that like Annihilus you can set up to facilitate a Galactus location by pushing a bunch of negative cards into one spot. And there might not be, like, if you completely junk your opponent out with Hobgoblin, the Hood, Green Goblin, and the Void from the Sentry, there's just nothing your opponent can do. They're just going to get Galactus, and there's no way for them to play around it. So, cool stuff. This is possibly my favorite deck from the event, from Cinderpuff here. So, I mean, partially that's because it's a Sasquatch deck, right? But I also really like Clea. I think that Clea might even be, I mean, Clea is the reason that I'm drawn to this deck, to be honest, but it's got some cool stuff going on in it. I feel like that's almost a catchphrase at this point. I say some cool stuff, or interesting is just kind of like word salad fillers that don't really mean anything. But Clea is a card that I just find to be a ton of fun, and this deck is going a little bit further with Clea even than I typically have with Joaquin Torres. Joaquin Torres here really just for the Hood, Clea's Flames of the Faultine, Merlin spells as well, and then I guess the Hawkeye basic arrow, which is like a Hawkeye. That can get played into Joaquin Torres as well. Copycat for a little bit of face down information, and Copycat just a good solid card. And then Mockingbird can take advantage of the demons, the arrows, and the Mysterio clones, as well as polymorph cards, I believe. And then Sasquatch, obviously, great combo with Mysterio, which is also a good combo with Gwenpool and The Thing. Fantastic for first steps, making a way into the deck. It's kind of interesting. That's not one that I would have expected, but I will say this deck does have a bunch of junk with the Mysterios and the Hood and stuff like that makes The Thing another way to be able to take advantage of those cards and just be like a 5-12 or something. If it's a 5-8 or a 5-10 that destroys a small card on your opponent's side of the board, it's like pretty good value, I think, regardless. In addition to that, we've got the Merlin to clean up Mysterio, to clean up the Hood. I think that all of that is really fun. And yeah, I like Marvel Boy as just a way to keep triggering on Clea. And that's basically that. This is almost like a Nicholas Scratch deck or something at this point. But yeah, like I said, Nicholas Scratch not gonna find its way into the Nicholas Scratch decks, because there's just other cards that you want to play. But I think that this list from Cinderpuff is definitely one that I'm going to be looking to try in the future. I think my Clea deck went a little more, but it was fairly similar. I don't even remember it because I deleted it a little bit ago in covering a different event. Right now, the only deck lists that I have in my game are the ones that I wanted to talk about in this video. I had to delete all of my other deck lists to talk about all of the sweet stuff that qualified for Worlds from this tournament, but I now have a bunch of new deck lists that I get to play with. So I'm going to keep this one around for sure, and you'll probably see it in a YouTube short to come up in one of my favorite ways to clear I'll just say this, to clear the quest where you have to play 1-cost cards. I just pick my Clea deck because then you get to play a bunch of Flames of the Faltine. This deck doesn't seem to go like as far with that, but you also still have the Merlin spell, and you've got the Hawkeye arrows, so you're gonna find some 1-cost cards to play, and it's just a lot of fun. So yeah, I'll definitely be doing that. Rabbit Sweep, so I probably should have checked to see what Rabbit Sweep played in the top of the previous Golden Gauntlet. I don't know if he played this same deck and did well with it, or if they played something different like I did and were just also able to top this event with a different deck or qualify from this event with a different deck. But it's definitely a name that I recognize, and this is an archetype that I like sort of recognize, but it's also sort of a little bit different. So this is sort of like a big ramp deck, right? With Electro and Lockjaw and Herbie and Jubilee and Blink all providing you a little bit of ramp for a set of 6-cost cards: Giganto, Magneto, Galactus First Steps, and Doctor Doom at the top of the curve. And then it also runs Storm, War Machine, Legion combo. One thing that I really respect about this deck, and I've kind of been waiting for someone to do this, is play Giganto instead of the Infinite, which can only be played if you have the War Machine in play. But like, Giganto is still pretty good. 16 power is still going to be bigger than most things. It won't actually be bigger than some Galactus First Steps, which kind of eats the Infinite's lunch a little bit, to be totally honest. And yeah, I think that it's cool to see like a slightly more reserved version of this deck. I'm trying to think of, okay, well, I mean, the main thing that you want to blink is Electro, right? If you can go Electro into Blink, but otherwise, on like the final turn, you're not doing any crazy Blink combos that I can see, though you do have access to Jubilee into Blink. That's a pretty good combo. Yeah, all right. So there's definitely some big plays that this deck can put out that are fairly surprising, and I just like that a Storm, War Machine, Legion combo is able to have like a little bit of success. I covered a deck not too long ago with the Snap Judgments League tournament last weekend that was a Storm War Machine Legion combo deck, and I think this is just like a better evolution of that deck list, which was a little bit more all-in on the War Machine game plan, Ebony Maul, the Infinite. I think that this deck can play a solid game of Marvel Snap, but also just has that combo to cheese people out if they are unable to interact with that. On the topic of Galactus First Steps, I actually wanted to circle back briefly to Arishem, because I do think that the Galactus First Steps is a good card in Arishem, to the point that I am kind of specifically playing Arishem because I think it's good at battling against opposing Galactus First Steps, just because with that extra energy on turn 3, being able to drop an Enchantress, being able to drop a Galacta or a Stardust gives you the means to battle against opposing Heralds, but that also could mean that Arishem is set up well to helm the Herald, and typically we see that Agamotto and Thanos get cut from those lists in favor of Galactus First Steps as the top end card, and you'd probably just play Eliath and then Galactus First Steps and cut Agamotto and Thanos. Like I said, I'm still partial to this build of the deck, that's why I played it, but I did want to mention that a few players did play Thanos. I have 4 players qualifying with Arishem, 2 of which were playing Thanos Arishem, and of course, one of those was me. So for the most part, players not playing Thanos currently in Arishem, instead opting for Galactus First Steps, which does have some real synergy with the archetype. Next, we have a list from Leeching Neon, and I wanted to talk about this one because it's not really anything. It is a Galactus First Steps deck, but it's kind of like an Arishemless Arishem deck, a Wiccanless Wiccan deck, a Fenrisless Fenris deck, and still managed to 5-1. This deck is really mostly trying to take advantage of Galactus First Steps and battle for that with Black Cat, and then Black Cat into Iron Patriot and Gladiator. Like, this is definitely a win the location deck. We can see a lot of cards that care about that. And then there's a pretty reasonable spread of tech in the deck. Shang-Chi, Cosmo, Cassandra, one of the only players. Oh, I guess the Phoenix Force decks were also playing Cassandra, but like no Darkhawk in this event basically at all, I don't imagine. But we do have a Cassandra as a way to keep some Arishem players honest. And then Sandman also at the top of the curve to potentially fight off some Vicky hand decks. I'm not exactly sure what else Sandman is directly targeting, but it is good against a variety of different things, good against the Thanos Stones, and just a really interesting deck here from Leeching Neon that I wanted to specifically acknowledge, despite it not... Okay, I will say there are some interesting things in this deck. Interesting. Ares is not a card that we see outside of Surtur decks, so that is really cool. And that is definitely worth noting. Also, just Herbie as a good stuff card. Herbie's best mode is likely always going to be the +2 energy aspect. But I think that, yeah, just like playing a bunch of good Marvel Snap cards, despite that really being not exciting, I think most players would say, I think it's cool that it's just possible. And it really shows me that the game is a lot more wide open than people really give it credit for. And you know what? We'll actually jump ahead to, I was almost not going to show Kamo's list here, because this is another deck that is blankless blank. It is Surferless Surfer and Zabuless Zabu. But Kamo was able to top 8 the previous event. They beat me. And they were able to top 8 this event, I believe. I have not double checked, but I believe with the exact same 12 card deck, which is like, okay, super impressive. You're able to do it again. This must be something that people should be looking at and are just not respecting the way that they should. but also because no one else is playing it, and I know that Kamo is a really, really good player, obviously, but the fact that people are able to do well with such I won't even say off meta, because that's the silly thing about both of these decks. It's just mostly good cards that people are otherwise also playing. But it is still off meta. Like Fastos and Okoye, yeah, it's a little bit off meta. And I think that the fact that these things are able to do well at the top levels in Marvel Snap really speaks to the openness of the game right now, which again is why I decided to play Arishem, because I think it's really good against decks like these ones specifically, but it's cool that those things are also cool. And speaking of the previous Golden Gauntlet, Dinesh was able to qualify for Worlds with Dinesh Hela, his deck, which I think is also really noteworthy because most players playing Hela have moved to the what's her name? Agatha version with black redshift. Let me see if I have the stats on this. I think these weren't calculated correctly because I personally thought that I saw multiple people playing Agatha Hela, but I see maybe that 2 people played Agatha Hela. It was either 2 or 3, and then I think there may have also been one other person playing Dinesh Hela, but I'm not positive. It may have only been Dinesh that played it. And this deck still has legs. Also, I played it in the previous event with some slight changes. We'll talk about those in just a moment. But I played this same archetype also instead of playing Redshift. And I really thought Dinesh was going to come around to the red shift of it all, but ultimately decided to rock this variant. And by the way, I think this is, fine to say, Dinesh was on vacation in when the last Golden Gauntlet qualifier happened. So I was conversing with him, but he was unable to play in the previous one, which I think is the only reason that he wasn't playing Hela and wasn't able to qualify in the previous event, because he is obviously a very top level player, and with the insights of being a top level player, he made a few changes to the Dinesh Hela archetype. And actually, Dinesh shared this list with me before the previous event. I said, hey, is there anything that you are considering that you think could be interesting to play in this event rather than like this current list that I have of yours? And he sent me this, I believe, potentially with Infinon instead of Emperor Hulkling. I can't remember like which, or maybe he sent me this exact list. I think he sent me this exact list, and that is what convinced me to try out Emperor Hulkling instead of Giganto in the list that I played. Oh, that's what, maybe he had Infinon instead of Giganto. I think that actually might check out. But he was playing both Enchantress and Grandmaster. Enchantress takes the role of the super giant slot, so that way, there's no invisible women in this tournament. Actually, as a whole, we're not going to look at a single Invisible Woman deck. We actually will, just because I wanted to include one in this video, but I do not believe a single player qualified for Worlds with Invisible Woman, which is wild to me. And then Grandmaster over Odin is another change that Dinesh made, another way to re-trigger those on reveals, which actually makes the deck very tricky to play in some really interesting ways. But Enchantress is added to the deck specifically to stop Stardust. And I will have to ask Dinesh, because he does record, he plays on his phone a lot, but he does record a lot of his games. Maybe I can ask him. He told me that he beat a Stardust in one of the rounds of this event, and that is an incredible testament to this archetype. I messaged him and I said, like, if you do well at this event with, and he qualified, but if he had top 16'd with an Enchantress version of Stardust, I think that like less people are potentially going to see it with him not top 16'ing, but you all will get the scoop here and just get to see like how resilient this Hela deck can be, and I think that that's incredibly scary. I think that being able to look at a metagame, and I don't know if I have all of the numbers here in front of me. Oh, I do. So according to my data, which probably has some holes in it, 87 players played Stardust in this event, and it was the 15th. No, it was not the 15th most played card. It was the 22nd most played card. I'll go over the top 10 real quick right now. Shang-Chi, Merlin, Shadow King, Surge, Alioth, Mobius the Hood, Enchantress, Negasonic, Killmonger. Iron Patriot, Nico Minoru really close behind at 11 and 12. So a lot of people playing Stardust. And also, by the way, a lot of people playing Cosmic Ghost Rider. That was number 15 with 103 players playing it. So definitely some strong cards there that I decided to add to my deck. I feel justified in that. But yeah, I just kind of, the Stardust could potentially scare people away from playing Hela. I didn't really see that. More people played Hela in this event than in the previous, and I thought that would be the case. That's one of the reasons I personally wanted to run Stardust. But when Stardust isn't enough to beat Hela, that is super scary. Now, there are different types of Stardust decks. There are Stardust decks where you play Stardust on turn 4. That might be a little bit more awkward than specifically an Arishem deck, which can take priority and then play Stardust on turn 5 or turn 6 with priority, but still there's some awkwardness there, because what can happen is you play Stardust on turn 5 with priority because your opponent is playing their Hela on turn 5 with their ramp from Corvus Glaive, and then they go, okay, well, you Stardust me this turn, but next turn, I'm going to play Enchantress on your Stardust now that it's on the board, and then I'm going to Grandmaster my Hela. And that is why Grandmaster is in the deck as a cheap way to re-trigger Hela. I'm not sure if that's exactly what Dennis did in the clip that he may or not be able to send me, but that is just an incredibly powerful and resilient strategy, while also being able to just go Enchantress, Grandmaster, Enchantress in 2 locations against ongoing decks, which won the previous event. So you want to be a little bit more prepared for. Danish is a monster, and the fact that they are able to put so much tech and tricky interactions into a deck that also goes so over the top, I think is just super, super impressive. So yeah, this is scary, and we'll see how Dennis continues to elevate and innovate on Hela in the future. Next up from Bood, we have Red Wing. This is cool. I just wanted to give a slight shout out to Red Wing here. I'm not going to talk about this one too much, but it's cool to see Red Wing have some success. We have a few different ways to move it, 4 different ways to move Red Wing, and of course now this is a Human Torch deck rather than a Vulture deck, which is definitely a downgrade for sure. It's also running Hellion as just like a big card that can move around the Human Torch, and then Dracula as a backup way to get one of these big cards out on the board. Fairly straightforward stuff. The previous Red Wing decks that we saw, I think, were Blink and War Machine decks with Electro, so that way they could curve out into these bigger cards. But cool that Bood is able to get it done with this. I think that the rest of that mostly speaks for itself. Oh, you know what I did want to speak on just real quick before we get to some of these final lists? This deck list was actually covered by KM Best on Friday, because the number 1 player on the ranked ladder, on the post-infinite ladder, was playing this deck, maybe with like 1 or 2 cards changed, but this deck comes from Safety Blade, a writer at Marvel Snap Zone, and I reached out to him because he beat me with this deck, and I was curious how he fit so much tech into Invisible Woman and still felt like he was putting up enough points. and I thought that this would maybe be a deck that I would consider for this event. I ultimately decided to go with Arishem just because I felt a little bit more familiar with those cards, which feel is a little bit ironic to say that I felt more comfortable with the cards in Arishem than with like an actual deck list, but I have not really gotten to play too much with Invisible Woman First Steps yet. I just unlocked it the other day, so I could potentially play it in the Golden Gauntlet, but I just felt like I wasn't comfortable with it enough, and I think I was justified in that with the fact that I went 5-1 with Arishem, right? But I also wanted to present this deck here in my video because Safety Blade does very well with it. The top player on the Post Infinite leaderboard does very well with it. I don't know what that player's name was, unfortunately, because I just had this written down as the Safety Blade deck, but I wanted to share this deck because there were no Invisible Woman First Steps decks that were able to qualify for Worlds through this event, at least that I saw. So I wanted to share one just to round out the video with another archetype before we get into some of this other. Oh, is this this is the final deck? Okay, and I don't think this one's going to be too exciting because I put it in last year. Yeah, okay, we're just wrapping it up here. That's fine. This is a Nimrod deck that doesn't play Kid Omega, doesn't play Shuri, doesn't play Phoenix Force. This is like fairly low collection level, fairly easy to put together, and that may be why Lady Damiana threw this one together. There is some cool stuff going on in it though. Enchantress as a tech card, and you can throw the Enchantress around with like an Arnim Zola or something, and otherwise it's like a fairly straightforward deck, I think, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. And actually, I think also, like, some of the decks that I'm showcasing because they are unimpressive, and I hope that that point is made clear, that it's impressive that these sort of unimpressive decks without any new cards are able to do so well. This deck has like Symbiote, Spider-Man, Nimrod as a way that it can go over the top additionally still, but for the most part, it's just trying to play some Nimrods, destroy them. It's got magic, so that way you can go Null Arnim Zola as well. That's a really big way to go over the top. And that is going to be it for this video. I think we covered a bunch of different decks. Let me just scroll through real quick, but I do think that we covered everything. Yeah, that is going to be it. And again, if you want to see me play with this Arishem deck in the Golden Gauntlet World Championship Qualifier, that will be my video tomorrow. But for today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace. To enter into my giveaway, there are 3 things that you need to do. The first is subscribe to this YouTube channel. The second is leave a comment on any of my videos. This season, every comment will give you an additional entry into the giveaway. Limit 1 per video, but you can comment on all of the videos that I upload throughout this season. And the third thing that you have to do is join my Discord. And the reason that I need you to do that is so that way I can contact you if you win, because YouTube comments, you don't always get the notifications for things like that. So join my Discord, leave a comment on all of my videos, and subscribe for more Sweet Marvel Snap.